the panel discussion, the style and format will be very similar to the Innov log session on the 12th of August, right? So it'll be a panel discussion as well on that day, and then we will take questions at the end. Right. So for this particular panel discussion, we have James, Avinda, and Rakesh coming in. And I thought I put in this quotation by, I think next slide, please, by Ravi Menon. Okay, before that, I think they're supposed. Okay, no worries. So Ravi Menon made this comment: Can Singapore be the Oxbridge of Asia for education? Given the trust premium Singapore enjoys and the high quality of our education, coupled with the rise of a more discerning Asian middle class, the stars might be aligned for such a pivot. So he also mentioned about how education and how to make education exportable, all right, to the region. I thought that was a very interesting statement to make by Ravi, Managing Director of Monetary Authority of Singapore. So next up, we have the three panelists who will join us for the next 1 hour. We will get them to each spend about 5 minutes to just talk about this area of business model transformation, after which we will take some questions from the participants, as well as also having an informal chat among us to run through and maybe propose some solutions. And I think in particular, right, I love to hear from Rakesh later on as well in terms of how the Chinese development may impact and cause the pivoting of edutech over to Singapore. But before we start, right, maybe I just share a little bit more about what I have been involved in as well, and then we get a panel to come in and talk about what they do. Yeah. Okay. So some of the things that I've been involved in, especially in terms of working with Udemy and so on, because right at the start, Udemy actually was very much a B2C business model. That means they cater to consumers. And the last 3 to 4 years, they actually move over to a lot more to B2B with their Udemy for Business kind of a packaging. So now they have two engines, right? So they actually pivoted to some extent from a B2C to a B2B kind of a business model that really scale up their offering. And I believe their numbers now are probably at about 50 million users on their platform. So that's just one example, right? And then personally, I'm also involved with developing some of the chatbots for learning for UNESCO. So we just did that in the past few months. And one of the things that I realized, right, with regards to regionalization and digitalization, and that has to do with languages, right? Multilingual requirements that kind of forces us to rethink how we design the learning services for our learners on the ground. Rakesh kind of mentioned as well, also on the ground, right? The need for local payments, the need for some of the very secured kind of payment methods. Well, likewise, also the need to contextualize learning services to what happens on the ground, right? In terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of also even Wi-Fi and the technology that's available. And finally, also just to want to mention that Dev, for those of us who are interested, right, is also available for some of us who want to get onto this digitalization journey. So you can also contact InLab to understand more about the journey that you can go on, right, to digitalize your own capabilities as well as your own resources. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to invite the three panelists back again to start the conversation. Okay, I'm just going to give Rakesh some time out, right, to rest. So James, want to go first on your 5 minute kind of quick talk about your thoughts about business model transformation. Thank you. Over to you, James. Just about 5 minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Firstly, I better do a mic check. Can you hear me?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you. And it's been a great pleasure and great experience to actually hear from the speakers before. I think really exciting stuff from Sid and Alvinda and DK, Yucheng, and obviously from Rakesh as well. Very exciting stuff. One thing I do here is that for payment, very important. Any sort of thing that can help me get paid, just get on board. So this one, anecdote, I learned from my daughter's swim coach. Old guy, 60 plus, almost 70 years old, but he was so receptive to that. My missus was asking, what's the way I can pay you? Anything. Pay now, pay la, whatever, PayPal, anything. And that's, I think, a very forward-thinking mindset from a swim coach. And I think we as training providers and learning technology companies that we really need to take on board. So if you're not on PayPal, I think better go talk to Rakesh. I think for business models, it's something that's very interesting for us. Arclab is a learning technology platform. We're not an ATO. But I think as educators and training professionals, we kind of need to walk the talk. Lah. This is what I learned as an officer in the SAF, as a former public servant, an employer, a mentor, and most of all as a parent. So imagine that we are training companies about digital transformation, but we still use pen and paper for attendance taking, for example. I think that's really bad signal. I visited tech companies and it required me to sign in an office visitor and health declaration form on paper. So that's not really giving me a lot of confidence in the technology of the company, not to mention that it's a PDPA risk. Then I immediately showed the office manager, hey, you can use Arclab, create a visitor registration and health declaration form, wrote into one, adapt the template from Arclab Discover. It takes 5 minutes. All the data is stored securely in the cloud. And I believe it's the same for training providers. And here, right, technology is not the enemy. Technology is not competition. So rather, right, tools like Arclab, like Playware, like Visionary Schoolman, and the speakers before, each of us augment you, just like the Iron Man suit augments Tony Stark. So Arclab and all the other providers that you've heard from today, we don't replace you as trainers, right? We make you Iron Man or Batman lah, if you prefer DC Comics. So I think technology, really for me, is meant to enable you as a training provider or even an internal L&D provider to do more with less, augment your training output, serve more with less, especially as labor market, right? It's so tight these days. So I think that's really the opening thing that I want to leave with yourselves. Over back to you, Michael.
Thanks, James. I like the Iron Man, Batman, and we'll add in Wonder Woman, right? Just to help the ladies not feel left out.
Of course. Sorry about that.
To serve more with less, I think that's a very key term, right? And I think that's where technology can help us going forward, right? Avinda, you mentioned about AI just now, right? I think that's something, Rakesh mentioned as well in his presentation. We'd like to tell us a little bit more how the AI kind of situation is, because very often we see AI, in very different shades of gray, right? Some AI can work, some AI can't, and so on. Of course, also you have prepared a speech, so go ahead and tell us more a bit about, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And of course, thank you all to the speakers. It was actually a really, really wonderful sharing by everyone. I think with regards to business transformation within the TAE sector, as well as the adoption of AI, I think what we're actually really essentially seeing is that the maturation of a lot of technologies that has actually come out from the last few years, from a POC kind of opportunity to now actually when you actually see them maturing, then the scaler will actually essentially take place, right? How do you actually essentially scale from a POC to a wider adoption? Because that will actually really impact on the survival of a lot of companies, all right? Because essentially you can actually do 1 or 2 projects, all right, with the sort of POC mode, all right? But then once you actually essentially see a consolidation taking place within the markets where there will be some champions that actually appear, that's when you actually will have to really prove your legitimacy, right, by scaling, right? How can you actually serve the market? How many learners can you essentially, serve? But also how easily, all right, can the learners and the companies, all right, or organizations adopt your technology, adopt your processes, adopt your workflow, all right? And I think that's where you actually will essentially see a lot of plug and play, adoptions, but also like what PayPal is doing, where you can actually sort of commoditize the payments aspect. All right. And that will actually essentially try to reduce your operational requirements, but also allow you to scale, because that's essentially how, the companies will essentially survive. All right. We could actually get by, all right, by doing some POCs, previously where some technologies were not so mature. But as the technologies get more and more mature, that's when, the challenge comes, right, where you really, really need to be able to be turnkey, all right, and be able to actually serve all right, as many clients as possible in a short space of time, and you want to be able to keep your operations or operational costs as low as possible, right? So this is where the restructuring with or the digitalization will actually essentially take place, right, within this industry.
Very good points there, Avinda. I think we need to get you to give a talk on from POC to market, right? Because very often, right, especially for edtech, right, we're constantly in POC stage, and moving out of that into go to a market kind of a stage is very, very critical. You made some very good points about mass adoptions, about B2C especially. And I think also within that particular conversation, whether organizations need to look at whether it's a B2C or B2B kind of a model. That's very important because the businesses as clients versus consumers as clients actually are very, very different kind of profiles, and will probably need a very different approach, right? So Rakesh, is it probably, I'm just thinking whether is it fair for me to say PayPal is very much in the B2C, or is it B2B, or in everything? You know what I mean? That's probably what it is, right? So, but Rakesh, over to you. Tell us a bit more. Sorry, Rakesh, I think you're muted. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
That's good. Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we serve all, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like, we're like Hard Rock Cafe. We love all, we serve all. Businesses, small businesses, and even large enterprises and consumers as well. So we're not discriminatory in that aspect. But one of the things that that came to mind when I was thinking through what to talk about on this panel, and when we first spoke to SkillsFuture, is that EdTech suddenly came to the forefront over the last couple of years, right? And the pandemic kind of like really shoved it, give it a kick in the proverbial, right into the next century. And we've seen so much development, and I think what we really see now is that you cannot afford not to digitalize. I think businesses now realize with the pandemic, anything can happen at the snap of a finger, and you need to pivot, right? And when you pivot, you just need to go out of your POC mode, as you say, into a real market mode, and then start, monetizing and making sure you make money from it. So I think that's number one, and it's key. And once you start doing that, you need to be nimble. I think a business needs to be nimble. You need to be ready to adopt and work with people who are established in the market, rather than looking at the cheapest possible cost. Because I think sometimes we get sidetracked by the cost benefit, the price, and there's a lot of commoditization in this payments industry to some extent. But I think a lot of people are very aware of price, right? But a lot of them still don't understand the value, right? So when it comes down to determining how much and who do I go after, price is always an issue, right? It's not wrong to talk about that, but I think you need to understand the value as well. So that's one aspect. The other one is digitization, as I was mentioning, right? And the ability to pivot quickly, adopting multiple modes of payments, omni-channel presence, that becomes absolutely key. Now, I think what's another phenomena that we've seen in the last couple of years is the emergence of marketplaces. And I think this is where, it started off with the retail marketplaces, right? Your Lazadas and your Shopees. But a lot, there's this growing emergence and move where you have more of these marketplaces, even for non-traditional businesses like education, insurance, health, right? They've realized that the internet is the biggest, democratizer of the economy, and that is where, maybe as a business owner doing training, you got to think about, would it be more appropriate for me to venture into a marketplace or form a marketplace with other like-minded training providers? Because that's how a lot of people shop today. 60 to 70% of global shopping, right, happens on marketplaces, right? Because the power of the marketplace is what draws people to it in many cases. So those are the kinds of thoughts that that came to mind. I would not be the right person, Michael, to address your question about the Chinese investments or investments flowing out of China, because my head of comms will come after me for giving my opinion. But that was just a personal observation of what I saw. But yeah, back to you, Michael.
Excellent, excellent insights, right? And absolutely agree with you, right? And that's kind of what's happening as well. So we get into the second phase. I'm going to invite also all the participants who are watching us right now to also post your questions, so that or comments actually, over to us, so that we can also discuss some of these issues and so on, right? But meanwhile, I'm going to get the panelists to just have the conversation. It's kind of free play and so on. I picked up a few points just now that many of us just mentioned. So maybe I just rattle off, right, if you don't mind. So Rakesh talked about marketplace, the localization of payment, but not just payment, I suppose, also the enculturation, right, of some of these services. For example, right, I can imagine how, let's say, someone in Philippines may, and whether that's true or not, may prefer a Filipino kind of a training institute, right, teaching him or her, or is that not true, right? So that's also another question. I do have staff, let's say, in Vietnam and also in Manila, and I know that very often they also like to seek experts in other countries for inputs. But when it comes to actual training in the classroom, they like that sense of familiarity and also possibly the contextualization that can take place. Okay, so that's one part of it, right? The localization. A few other points that I kind of picked up as well. Just now, I think Avinda mentioned about scale. I think we should talk about that again. How to scale properly, how to scale in a more natural fashion, and also scale quickly, right? And then, of course, also, James, you mentioned a few very useful points about also how we can get into this space of marketplace and so on. So let's talk a bit more there. I'm going to open it up to the three panelists to just have a free play, right? And then just converse. Over to you. Anyone, go ahead.
Maybe I'll just touch on your.
Go for
Maybe
it,
I'll just
Rakesh.
jump in and quickly. Yeah, thank you, James. I'll just touch on your point on localization. I probably agree with what you said just now, that local staff would probably prefer local content. But given what I've seen now in the marketplaces, right? The education that people are striving for or seeking, right, is sometimes of better quality outside your home country. And I think people now are so receptive to absorbing content from foreigners, right, from foreign countries. But as long as you speak English, right, that's perhaps the most important thing. I mean, if I can draw my personal experience, I subscribed recently to this app or this service or this website called Masterclass, right? Where you have people, giants of industries, talking about various things, and these are Americans, talking about creativity, about Gordon Ramsay talking about food, and that divide is no longer there anymore, right? So I think that's less of an issue. But if anything, it's to bring it back to localization and to talk about it in a payments context. This is what when a buyer is paying for something, that's what they want. They want localized payment options. So if somebody is from Philippines getting content from overseas, they want to see what's relevant for them to pay. And I think that's really important, so that you contextualize the experience, and you don't force people to be saying, do I only have to use these two things? So somebody from Germany who wants to buy training content from Singapore, right, when they buy it on our platform, they will get to see whatever is relevant. So you as a seller, you don't have to worry that, oh, do I have the local equivalent of the nets over there, which is called Ideal or so forth, right? Because the platform kind of takes care of it. So that's my thought around localization. Content is universal, but I think payment is personal in that sense.
Yep. I'm going to jump in a bit.
James,
I do agree that, yeah, let me jump in. Content, I do agree that sometimes there's no right or wrong. Some folks like local, some like foreign. And I think that for Arclab, we empower a lot of internal training. So we give a platform for you to create training that's best suited to your audience, no matter where they are. One thing I do think it's very important is that in today's environment, in the COVID endemic world, it's no longer possible to gather 100 to 200 people in a training room. So you really have to do this more efficiently and effectively. I think that that's where mobile and digital really comes in as a business continuity as well as a business as usual situation. Leverage the power of mobile, stage out learning through bite-sized modules, and you deliver it directly to the devices of your learners wherever they are in the world, especially for training businesses that you want to reach an overseas audience. If you are an internal L&D, but you have staff working for you who are spread across multiple countries, do this through mobile, through digital, and you can scaffold and stage this very easily. Just like, if you take the example of the academic education, you wouldn't dump the O-level 10-year series on a primary one student, right? So how then do you stage out the learning throughout the staff's employment journey or training journey? That's really important. So I think for Arclab, and I think a lot of the providers that have spoken before, is really to help the AEs and the L&Ds to stage, to scaffold out learning, and the bite-sized nano learning that we advocate directly to the staff's device, mobile learning. That's something that I think very useful to consider. And with that, I'll hand it back to Michael.
Yeah, I mean, in a especially for MNCs, right? The L&D units are very, very sensitive to the needs of their staff in the various countries, and they will tell you, oh, over in this country, we can't speak like that, or over in that country, you got to watch that sensitivity and so on, right? They are very, very sensitive, and that's the nice part, because then they are aware of the needs in the various countries, right? So that's and so that's why I feel that sometimes, right, there is a little bit of a diverse needs in terms of the within MNC, within an enterprise kind of a staff development capability building versus out there, right, in the public, how we address their learning needs as well. And so being mindful of how we approach both or even more of such groups of learners will be very useful for any SME, any training providers going out there. And that's just my thought. Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just jump in. And I think, Michael, you actually touched on it perfectly, where you have different training needs depending on the audience that you actually have. And so essentially, I think starting with who your learners are, all right, and ensuring that they actually meet the they receive the instruction that is actually addressed to them, right, or the assessment that is actually assessed to them, that is perfect for them. And this is actually achieved essentially by understanding the local context or the requirement that the learners essentially require to ensure that they actually gain those competencies, and whether it's actually a overseas content or local content will be determined by the requirement to actually achieve those competencies. And I think as domain experts, you would actually best understand that requirement, right? So if a local context is important because the work that these learners essentially do, all right, requires that, then the instruction has to be tailored to actually meet that requirement. If, let's say, for example, international content is perfectly fine because that localized content is not a facet of the service that they deliver, right, for these learners, then you do not need to actually put in that effort for a localization, because that is actually costly as well, or will actually be a hindrance for you, in terms of actually trying to add features or a modules that may not be required. All right, so really understanding that requirement in terms of what is required to achieve competencies, all right, and as a domain expert, you would know that best, all right, or you would actually understand the requirements of your learners best. All right, back to you, Michael.
Feel free to have a free flow, right? Yeah, Rakesh,
yeah. I'm just thinking. Can I pose a question to maybe James and Navinder? You know, based on what you guys are doing, it seems that you approach companies and and in probably Avinder's case, Changi General Hospital, to try and implement, to adopt your services and your technology, and it's obviously in the spirit of helping them to digitize their business. What do you see are the key challenges or the inertia, that these companies that you approach, from that's stopping them from adopting all these new the new technology that you have?
Yep.
I think
Perhaps
I think you hit the
James,
nail
go
on the
ahead.
head. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. I think you hit the nail on the head. The key word here is inertia. We've always done things this way, so why should we change? Well, the question was answered last year, lah, when the first COVID case erupted, and I think we live in a world, right, where no longer can you do things that you used to do before January 2020. So I think that's something that all organizations have now started to understand. I think going a bit further, because we can't gather people or into large groups, I think the old way of even deploying software, where you got like system integrators coming in huge teams to implement software for companies, that's also been turned on its head, right? So take the example of our business. If we required complicated software installation process with system integration consultancy, it would be really logistically intensive, it would be expensive, and it'd probably not be so easy to get budgets approved. Because anything that is hard, it tends not to be adopted. As people, right, we like the path of least resistance, which is why TikTok is so popular, because you just keep watching the first video and then the second video and then the third video, and then by the end of it, you've watched like 2 hours. So the other thing that I think is also important is that we're using all sorts of apps and platforms in our daily lives. The apps we use, right, as consumers, they are fuss free. They're simple to get on because so much thought has been put into the UX and the design. But some of the business software that we use is still very legacy, very unintuitive. And I think that cannot be the case going forward. And as organizations and even as ATOs and training providers, you should never accept anything that is difficult to adopt, especially if you are training an audience that is more any audience, one either young or very digital savvy, or two very senior, very not familiar with apps. We should make that training process as simple as possible. So for us, we have the privilege to serve a lot of F&B companies with so Facion Group, for example, employing over 1,600 staff across Let's Eat, Malaysia Boleh, etc. Four Fingers, close to 1,000 staff. That platform must be easy for the staff, i.e. the learner, to adopt. As simple as your Instagram, as simple as your TikTok. I think that is the key thing that all organizations, all training organizations, as well as companies, should really adopt as a mindset. That's my take. Alvinda, anything to share?
I'm going to jump in here before Avinda says something, right? Because there is a question that's related to, and Avinda, the question is also posed to you. And the question really is, how has the adoption of Arclab and VSM platforms helped the companies to transform? I think, James, you mentioned rightly, so the simplicity of the solution is very important. Can you then elaborate a little bit more based on this question? How has Arclab helped companies to transform?
Absolutely. I think thank you, Michael, and thank you to the participant who posed this question. Training is not done for training's sake. I mean, regardless of how adult educators might think, right? Training helps the workforce to get up to speed to meet business objectives. So I think that most of all, we must help workforces to achieve more with less, i.e., improve productivity, improve business top line, and hopefully this translates into justifiably higher salaries, which creates a virtuous loop. So I think a lot of the businesses that we support, there must be an end goal that they are trying to meet with this. So for the companies we serve, how to deliver training at scale. So imagine Facion, 1,600 staff. How do you get your L&D folks to go to 160 outlets? That's impossible to do without high cost and expense and time. But through our platform, with one click of a button, 1,600 notifications are sent out. And I think that's really how you scale delivery of training effectively. The second thing, obviously, is to map it to training outcomes. So on our advisory board, we have Professor Karen from SIT. She is Deputy Director of SIT's co-lead, and she helps to really map back the training ROI that the companies who adopt Arclab want to see. And then obviously through the data that is present in our learning analytics, we map back to business objectives. So it's very important for the L&D as well as the external training provider to always map back to what the business wants to achieve, and then the analytics data that we provide can help to measure that.
So it sounds like a very virtuous cycle, right? How the data actually informs business practices, strategies, and ensuring that training is delivered at scale,
Yep.
right? For the 160 outlets, especially Fei Xiong Group. Thank you so much. Avinda, your response there, please.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you to the participant who actually asked that question. And James is absolutely right. This is actually essentially what's happening in the industry is that you actually have companies, or actually two major groups, where you have the sophisticated companies who actually have sort of implemented the best practices already, and they are like looking for something a little bit different now, all right, with regards to learning and development, right? So for such companies, essentially what they are really looking for, all right, is with regards to learning and development, how that impacts business operations, right? How that impacts the services that they provide or the products they actually deliver, all right? And of course, there is the other group where they actually have not really employed much, technology solutions for the learning requirements, all right, and then they want something that is actually very, very easy to actually adopt, because they may not actually have a formal department handling such solutions or the training requirements. So how do you essentially service both client types, right, where you actually have a very, very sophisticated client who have pump in a lot of money, all right, and they have adopted all the best practices, and yet they want something, they are not able to actually meet those requirements that they actually see from their learning and development, all right. And so for us, when we actually talk to such clients, all right, we actually have to be mindful of those requirements. So I'll just take into, for example, the sophisticated type of clients who already have the LMSs, they already have, they have actually sort of implemented very sophisticated systems in managing, all sorts of metrics, all right, with regards to, the assessment performances, the learning performance, and also maybe perhaps even HR performances, all right, and they have already sort of integrated all of this already. So how do you actually then service such a client, all right? And so typically what they are looking for, all right, is essentially, all right, the training and development, all right? There is a slight disconnect between the training and development unit with regards to operational requirements. And what I mean by that is essentially, if you employ perhaps this particular workshop or this particular course, what is the impact on the bottom line or the operational efficiency? They want to have an insight into that. And that actually essentially means, all right, can you tell me that by employing this particular tool, what sort of business outcomes are likely to take place? All right, do I see, let's say, for example, 5% or 10% lesser attrition rate? All right, do I see perhaps, hundreds and thousands of dollars of new business? All right, tell me what actually happens when I employ this tool. Now you actually have to then design your tools to be able to actually address those questions. Now that means, all right, in your services and your product offering, there ought to be those data captures to be able to actually capture those data for such sophisticated clients, right? Which is a very different product offering from the ones who say, you know what, I just want to be able to deliver this set of instruction, all right, and that is what digitalization means to me, right? Because on a sophisticated client, all right, digitalization means very different. They are looking for essentially, show me that my business will grow, all right, show me that for every dollar that I give you, all right, I get back $3 or $5 or whatever matrix that they are actually capturing, all right. So for us, when we actually take a look at this, it may also mean a very different, business model or payment model, right, for such clients. So I'll give you an example, all right. You could actually go for a typical SaaS model, all right, for one set of clients, all right, where they pay per seat, all right. So let's say, for example, X dollars per month for this number of users, all right, and they actually subscribe to your services. Another set of clients could be there is no payment for seats at all. You only pay for business efficiencies and you take a percentage of that. And similar to how, like for example, PayPal does it, all right? For every X dollars that is transacted, there is a fees that is actually, as part of the transaction. So imagine this, right? For a client saying, "Oh, I adopt your services for free," all right, but in return, all right, for whatever business efficiencies that you actually gain, we take a percentage of that, right? Then you have to take a look at how, when you think about digitalization within the TAE sector, all right, it may actually be innovations in even business model, all right, to actually service different clients as well. All right, back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Avinda. I think what you mentioned was very interesting. Essentially, that simply means that training providers are getting into the space of helping organizations not just transform, but also helping organizations perform better, right? Being more efficient and maybe even more effective, upskilling people to perform different roles, right? Basically, that also helps to answer the one of the questions in the post. But I do want to come back to Rakesh. There's one question which I thought maybe you can answer, or anyone, right? And this question has to do with as an SME, the margin of error is quite small, which quite true in deciding who to partner, right? Who to partner in transforming my business model as a training provider. So how do I proceed in a low risk manner? So basically two parts. Number one is deciding who to partner to transform my business. Secondly is how do I proceed in a low risk manner? Any thoughts there? Anyone actually? But Rakesh, have a go at it first.
Yeah, I can answer that question, but I just wanted to go back to James's point just now about the inertia, about why there was inertia, and COVID came around and removed the inertia, and it's so ironic, right? In our industry, in the payments industry, for the last 5-6 years, we've been trying really hard to get people, to go digital. We spend a lot of money in marketing and developing products and services, billions and billions of dollars, not just us, but the entire industry. And we've only managed to move it so much, right? And then here you have this unseen virus that comes in and it just totally, multiplies the effect of, what we're trying to do. So sometimes the inertia is not just, from us, but it can be eradicated by something else more, more unseen actually. But to answer your point, for a business, you're right. There's always an inherent risk in when you're starting to digitize or your business. I think personally, if it were me, I would look at track record. Right, you got to go with the people who understand the business. I'll go to visionary schoolmen who, if they want AI, right? So I know they are the guys to do AI in Changi. If I'm a hospital guy, and these are guys that done it well. You got to go for people who have done it before, right? Who have got the track record. And I think this is one way of looking at it. For us, we've been in the business almost 20 years. We do $1 trillion of processing a year. So I think we understand payments. There are obviously other options around, as I said earlier on, that you're free to choose, right? It's to decide. But at the end of the day, you got to think to yourself, if something breaks, right? Who do I call? Can I call? Will they be able to resolve it for me? How fast will they be able to resolve it for me? Because I'm running when you do something on the internet, right, or mobile, it's a 24/7 business. Right, you want to be able to at 3 a.m. at night, something goes down. There's a number for me to call, and there's somebody who's going to be able to help me. So I think that's the kind of consideration you need to think about, and that's where the question then comes back to the price value, right? Because they're going to say, provider A, you're so much more expensive. Then ask what else is beyond that price, that transaction fee that Arvinda mentioned just now that PayPal charges. Just dig a little deeper. Right. What else do you provide aside from just processing that payment? So that's my 2 cents take on that.
James, Abinda?
I would like to, yeah, I would like to add on to what Rakesh's very excellent point there about go with the people who do that work as their core business. I think that's really important because I think as adult educators and even L&D, we may think, oh, I'll build my own LMS, I'll build my own training authoring tool, I'll build my own AI, or I'll build my own payment system, which obviously is very hard to do. So if you build it, firstly, it's a cost. So you need to have the resources to do it upfront. After building it, you need to maintain it. And if that's not your core business, imagine a F&B operator trying to build an LMS, build a payment gateway, and build an AI training system. They're not going to be able to devote resources adequately to each of them. So better to focus on the core business. And for adult educators, the core business is training. You are the subject matter experts for the training content that you deliver to the market. If you need an authoring tool, talk to Arclab. Talk to if you need game-based learning, talk to Playware. If you need like MR, talk to SFX. If you need AI, talk to Visionary Schoolman. And obviously, if you need payments, talk to PayPal. So these are, I think, an important consideration that we need to bear in mind. So I, as a mobile learning provider, I focus on what I do best. That's our baby, and we take care of it and we improve it each and every single day. And that's the same for Alvinda, that's the same for Rakesh. The products that we put out to the market is always improving. And that's where I think as AEs, as even internal L&D teams, we focus on the core business, and then we go to the people who do our respective core business and plug it into your training as well as operations. 2 cents worth.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense, right? And adding on as well, right? I absolutely agree with you. I also have had experiences whereby the values of the partner also absolutely critical, right? And sometimes while we can start the journey together, then at some point, we may depart and separate. If it's on good terms, that's great, but sometimes it may not be on such good terms. So sometimes, especially with training providers, where as educators, many of us are very passionate about certain things, and the values can be a little laden, I would say. So it becomes also very important to look at the values as well. That's my thought. I also want to add on whereby the local partner, especially if we are moving into certain countries, right, may also be a very, very critical kind of player in this critical lever that will help us to engage with the market. Let's say in Vietnam or Ho Chi Minh, especially a market that speaks a different language, right? So when it comes to law, legal matters, comes to authorities, regulations, wow, a local partner they can trust. I think that's very, very critical. What do you think?
For us, local, especially markets where we don't have a strong ground presence. Partners are essentially our lifeblood. We cannot achieve scale the way that we have when we don't work with partners. So globally, I think it's a well-known fact that Shopify is a partner for us, right? So if you're a training provider or if you're an e-commerce seller and you have Shopify, PayPal is one of the default options there. And they reach out to a mass of sellers or merchants that we cannot physically sometimes get to as well. So local, and the thing is that a lot of these local partners sometimes, aside from Shopify, we in certain markets we have a very localized player, right, who's good in that market, who we partner with to help us to scale and grow. And you cannot get away from that because we cannot sit here in Singapore thinking that we know, this Cairo, for instance, if you want to go to Egypt, right? Sitting down here and just Googling and finding somebody. I think you need somebody who really knows the ground. And I think we've learned that. We've learned our hard lessons as well, trying to do it. But we know eventually we have to invest in a local partner to help scale the business.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. We just got maybe a few more minutes and then I'll wrap up. But maybe at this point, right, I think we have mentioned quite a fair bit. And I think also there's been a lot of discussion about, different aspects, right, from manpower, which is like HR and so on, to payments, definitely a little bit on marketing, and of course also at the business strategy level and so on, right? Maybe a couple of minutes for each gentleman to just wrap up your thoughts, just one punchline for the participants just to take away, and then I'll wrap up. James.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I think to really end off what we've learned today is to be agile. Don't start by trying to build Rome, because Rome wasn't built in a day. So I think the best thing we can think of is don't start to rebuild your house. Maybe start with renovating your room. Small pilots, internal champions, much better risk reward. And I think easier to get buy-in from management, get buy-in also from your staff and learners. So the software as a service model, pay as you go, is a really good small or no commitment upfront model that it's useful to take on board. And then you study the data, you see what's working and what's not. And you work with the business units and you work with the provider, and then you make the necessary adjustments. So start small, and then you think big, and then you scale up as the data supports it. Then you need help, come talk to us or any of the colleagues that have spoken today. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, James. Appreciate the insights. Avinda.
All right. Thanks, Michael. So I think one opportunity that we can all take away, all right, is to actually sort of inspect your own motivations and legitimacy of your business. As a TAE provider, as a edtech company, all right, what exactly motivates you to deliver your services, and how exactly digitalization, all right, ought to take place to ensure that path forward, all right, is actually one that makes business sense, all right, but also put you on the right footing with your clients, all right, because this will determine your relationship with the clients, all right. Are you a technology company with academic offering, or are you an academic company with a technology offering? And these are two very, very different companies, two very different businesses, essentially, because one is essentially a technology software business, all right, with a product offering in the education space. Another one, all right, is an academic company, all right, or education company that actually delivers their academic content, all right, through a technology driver, all right. And understanding that will actually map your digitalization journey, all right, because that will also determine where your investments are placed, as well as how you scale, all right. It will actually determine how and whom you partner, all right, as well as the opportunities that actually you need to be able to focus on, all right. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Avinda. I really like your point about education versus technology. Which side on the fence are you on, right? And how to merge them and scale. I think there are organizations out there that are pretty confused about that identity. And it's not an easy question to answer, actually, sometimes, right? Rakesh, over to you. Your punchline.
Yeah, that's an existential question actually from Alvinda, right? For a lot of training providers. Here are my thoughts around this. The global marketplace is borderless, right? And as much as we are going out of Singapore to acquire customers out of Singapore, your competitors are trying to acquire your customers in Singapore who you think you used to have a monopoly on. So it's an open marketplace, it's an open field. So internationalizing and growing cross-border is no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have, right? And as going back to what James was saying just now, you start small. And how do you start small is you kind of partner with somebody who kind of knows what they're doing, and in the payment space is somebody like us. You start small, 15 minutes for you have the ability to accept payments from all over the world and from everybody who's got PayPal, and then slowly scale up, right? And learn the ropes. Trial and error obviously comes into play when running a business, but I think that's the whole idea, that you gotta make sure you're eating somebody's lunch because they are gonna eat your lunch, and you got to make sure that you're ready to step up to the global stage.
Thanks, Rakesh. There you have it. Three gentlemen. James says start small. Avinda says answer the existential question who we are. And then of course Rakesh says global competition. They are here to eat our lunch. So please have a full stomach before you get in. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, panelists. Thanks, participants, for joining us as well. So just a quick wrap up as well for today. We actually have bumper cross 7 speakers. With that, we had, let me just read them out so that I don't miss anyone. So we started with ST Engineering, and that was Yichen. Then IXS, that was Christabel, who took us through e-teams. And for ST Engineering, it was Skeleto. And subsequently, we had that's right. Give me a minute there. Arclab. All right. So he talked about mobile learning without an app. That's James. And then Sid talked about Playware. Talk about his gamification for L&D. That's Playware Studios. Then TK from SFX Core talked about AR, VR, basically XR, right? On team collaborations. Avinda, of course, from Visionary Schoolman, talked about AI, especially immersive learning with AI, and Rakesh from PayPal on borderless commerce. Exciting stuff. Very important for us to keep in mind that really the competition has just gotten hotter, more global. People can be from all over the world, both your customers as well as your staff and your competitors, right? And also in a sense with China, with US, with India, so on and so forth, the various big countries coming out of their own space, their own landscape, and possibly moving into a city state like Singapore, where there is kind of lots of money at a per capita level. Then there is potentially competition for us. But likewise, we should also consider going regional, going global, if we are able to scale, start small, but think big. So with that, I do want to thank all the speakers for today. I want to thank IngLab, I want to thank SSG, and also I think Adrenaline and so on, who have made all this possible. So I'm Michael Choi. And for those of us still interested, you have upcoming the tech meeting with the solutionists. That's right. Thank you very much. That's on the 11th of August, right? And the registration link is there. You can meet Arclab, PayPal, Playware Studios, FX Core, as well as Visionary Schoolman for the virtual meetup. This is for key decision makers. And then on the 12th of August at 3 p.m., you have the Innolog, and that's really also at for all of us, right, to participate in that as well. So 2 more activities. The InnoDev is something that if you are a training provider, you may want to consider engaging the blended learning consultants for some kind of consulting work. All right, that's also heavily subsidized by SSG. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to have you again, so please join us again. And here's all of us signing off for SkillsFuture Month 21. Have a good day ahead. Good night.